Zola froze halfway down the hallway when she heard the front door lock behind her. Her suitcase was already on the porch. Her mother didn't look at her. She simply pointed toward the driveway where her older sister, Naira, stood crying with 2 children beside her. "She needs this house more than you do," her mother said. Before Zola could answer, someone knocked at the front gate asking for her by name. Nobody inside knew why. But 20 minutes later, the family that had forced her out was desperately trying to stop her from leaving. "My name is Zola. I was 29 years old and worked as an operations coordinator for a regional logistics company. My job was busy, but I always made time for my family. After my father passed away, I helped my widowed mother with almost everything. Whenever money became tight, I paid the utility bills without making a big deal about it. I took care of insurance papers, arranged repairs when something broke, and handled many small problems before anyone else even noticed them. I never expected praise because I believed that helping family was simply the right thing to do." Everything changed on one ordinary afternoon. I came home from work expecting a normal evening, but the moment I opened the front door, I felt that something was wrong. My older sister, Naira, was standing in the living room with her 2 children. She had recently separated from her husband, but nobody had told me she was coming back. Before I could even ask what had happened, my mother looked at me and calmly said that Naira and the children would be moving into my bedroom from that day forward. I stood there in complete shock. I asked where I was supposed to sleep, but nobody answered my question. Then I noticed my clothes, books, and personal things being packed into suitcases. Some boxes were already waiting near the front door. It was obvious that this decision had been made long before I arrived home. No one had asked for my opinion. No one had even warned me. I felt like I was a guest inside the house I had spent years helping to keep together. Before I could understand what was happening, someone knocked at the front gate. A man I had never seen before politely asked if Zola was home. The entire room became quiet as every member of my family looked at him with confused faces, wondering why a complete stranger had come looking for only me. I looked at my mother and asked the same simple question again. "Why do I have to leave today?" Instead of giving me a real answer, she repeated the same words. "Your sister needs stability." My aunt said the same thing. My cousin nodded and repeated it again. It was as if everyone had agreed to use the exact same sentence. I understood that Naira was going through a difficult time, and I truly felt sorry for her. But I still could not understand why helping her meant forcing only me out of the house. There were other rooms, other choices, and other ways to support her. Yet nobody wanted to explain why I had to be the one making the sacrifice. Before I could ask another question, the man at the gate introduced himself. He politely said he worked for a property management company. He apologized because he had tried to meet me earlier that week but had missed me. Then he said he had several important documents that needed my signature as soon as possible. I was confused because I had never spoken to any property management company before. The moment my mother heard his words, her face changed. She quickly stepped forward and told him that I was busy and that he should come back another day. The man looked surprised. He glanced at me as if he expected me to decide for myself. Before leaving, he quietly handed me his business card. Then he said something I could not stop thinking about. "These documents cannot legally be signed by anyone except you." As he walked away, I stood there holding the card in my hand. For the first time, I felt certain that something important had been hidden from me, and my family already knew far more than they were willing to admit. That evening, I decided not to argue with my family. I knew that no matter what I said, nobody was ready to listen. I packed a few more things and went to stay at my close friend's apartment. She welcomed me without asking too many questions. She simply gave me a place to sleep and told me I could stay as long as I needed. I was grateful, but I could not stop thinking about everything that had happened. My mother's words kept repeating in my mind. The stranger from the property management company. The papers that only I could sign. None of it made sense. A few hours later, my phone rang. It was my aunt. Her voice was calm, almost cheerful, as if nothing unusual had happened that day. She asked if I was doing all right and said she hoped I understood that everyone was only trying to help Naira. I listened quietly because I wanted to hear what she would say next. Then, without thinking, she said something that immediately caught my attention. "You've always been generous, especially after everything your grandfather arranged for you." I froze for a moment. "What do you mean?" I asked. What did Grandpa arrange? The other end of the call became completely quiet. For several long seconds, she said nothing at all. When she finally spoke again, her voice sounded nervous. Oh, it's nothing important. Don't worry about it. I asked the question again, but this time she quickly changed the subject. She started talking about Naira's children and how difficult life had become for them. It was obvious she was trying to avoid my question. Before I could ask anything else, she suddenly said she had another call coming in and ended the conversation. I stared at my phone, wondering why one simple question had made her so uncomfortable. My grandfather had passed away several years earlier. He had always been careful with paperwork and believed that every important decision should be written down. But after he died, nobody in the family ever mentioned any special arrangements. If something really existed, why had everyone stayed silent about it? That night I made an important decision. I would not accuse anyone. I would not start another family argument. Instead, I would quietly find the truth for myself. If my grandfather had left behind something important, I wanted to understand it before anyone else decided what I should or should not know. I had a feeling that the answer to everything had been hidden for years, and I had just found the first small clue. The next morning, I woke up with only one thought in my mind. I needed answers. My aunt's strange words from the night before would not leave me alone. Instead of calling my mother or arguing with anyone in the family, I decided to visit the neighborhood where my grandfather had lived for many years before he passed away. It had been a long time since I had walked those streets. Everything looked familiar, but it also reminded me of the days when my grandfather was still alive. He was a careful man who never liked confusion. He believed that every important promise should be written down so nobody could change the truth later. As I walked past his old house, an elderly man sitting outside looked at me for a moment. Then he smiled. "You must be one of Mr. Dlamini's grandchildren," he said. I nodded in surprise. "Yes, I'm Zola." The man smiled again. "I knew it. You have the same family name." He invited me to sit with him for a few minutes. We began talking about my grandfather. He spoke about him with so much respect that it almost felt like he had known him better than some of my own relatives. Without knowing anything about what had happened at my mother's house, he shared something that immediately caught my attention. "After your grandfather retired, he spent months organizing important papers," the man said. "I helped him carry boxes, sort old files, and arrange documents. He kept saying that one day there might be misunderstandings in the family, so he wanted everything recorded properly." I listened carefully without interrupting. Then the man added something that made my heart race. He especially wanted every contribution made by each grandchild to the family home written down. Every payment, every repair, every responsibility. He didn't want anyone's efforts to be forgotten. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. No one in my family had ever mentioned records like that. My mother had never talked about them. My aunt had stayed silent. Even Naira had never said a single word. I asked if he knew where those papers had gone. The man thought for a moment before answering. "I don't have them," he said. "But I remember the person who helped prepare all those documents with your grandfather. He was someone your grandfather trusted completely." Before I left, he gave me the man's name and told me where I might be able to find him. As I thanked him and walked away, I realized this was no longer just about losing my room. Every answer I found was leading to another question, and for the first time, I felt I was getting closer to the truth my family had kept hidden for years, using the information the elderly neighbor had given me. I arranged to meet the retired family advisor who had worked closely with my grandfather for many years. He welcomed me politely into his small office, but I could tell he was being careful from the moment I sat down. He asked about my grandfather, my work, and how my family was doing. I answered honestly, but I knew he was waiting for the real reason I had come. Finally, I told him everything. I explained how my sister had suddenly moved back home, how I had been asked to leave without any warning, and how a property management representative had arrived asking only for me. I also told him about my aunt's strange words and how everyone in my family kept avoiding my questions. He listened quietly without interrupting. When I finished speaking, he remained silent for a few moments. Then he folded his hands and looked directly at me. "Has anyone ever explained why your grandfather insisted that every financial contribution be recorded under the name of the person who made it?" I looked at him with complete confusion. No, I answered. Nobody has ever told me anything like that. The expression on his face changed immediately. It was not anger or surprise. It looked more like disappointment. He slowly shook his head, but did not open any files or show me any documents. I'm sorry, Zola, he said. There are confidential records that I cannot discuss unless the proper process is followed. Your grandfather gave very clear instructions, and I must respect them. Although he refused to tell me what was inside those records, he gave me one piece of advice before I left. Do not sign away anything. Do not give up any responsibility or agreement until you fully understand why your grandfather kept such detailed records. He never did things without a reason. His words stayed with me as I walked out of his office. Until that moment, I believed my mother had forced me out only because she wanted to help Naira. But now that explanation no longer made sense. Too many people knew about documents that I had never been told about. Too many questions were being avoided. For the first time, I began to believe that my removal from the house had very little to do with my sister and everything to do with something my grandfather had carefully planned years before. A few days later, my mother called and asked me to come to a family dinner. She said everyone wanted to calm things down and find a peaceful solution. I wanted answers, so I agreed to go. When I arrived, I saw that it was not just a family dinner. My uncles, aunts, cousins, and several older relatives were already sitting around the table. The atmosphere felt serious, and I realized they had all gathered to talk about me. After dinner, my mother stood up and thanked everyone for coming. She said the family needed to stay united during a difficult time and that everyone should think about what was best for Naira and her children. Then one by one, my relatives began sharing their opinions. One aunt said I should make a sacrifice because I was single and could easily live somewhere else. An uncle said family should always come before personal comfort. Another cousin praised me for always being responsible and said this was another chance to prove how much I loved my family. They all spoke about kindness, loyalty, and putting others first. I listened quietly before asking one simple question. If everyone believes this is the right decision, why has nobody explained why I had to leave instead of discussing other options? No one answered. I asked another question. Why did the property management company come looking only for me? Again, nobody said a word. Instead, they quickly changed the subject back to helping Naira. It became clear that they wanted my agreement, not my questions. For a moment, I felt completely alone. Every face around the table seemed to expect me to accept their decision without understanding it. Then, an elderly relative who had been silent throughout the evening slowly put down his cup and looked around the room. He spoke calmly but firmly. If Zola leaves this house, he asked, who will fulfill the responsibility your father specifically assigned? The room became completely silent. My mother lowered her eyes. My aunt looked away. Even Naira stopped speaking. No one answered him. In that quiet moment, I realized something important. The family was not hiding one small secret. They were hiding something so important that a single question was enough to stop the entire conversation. Later that week, my phone rang while I was at work. The number looked familiar. It was the retired family advisor. His voice was calm as he told me that someone had finally given permission to release part of my grandfather's archived records. He asked if I could come to his office that afternoon. I agreed immediately because I had been waiting for this moment ever since our first meeting. When I arrived, a thick file was already waiting on his desk. He carefully placed it in front of me and explained that these were only some of my grandfather's records. Certain documents could still not be opened because the conditions written by my grandfather had not yet been met. I slowly opened the file, expecting to see a will or papers showing who owned the family house. Instead, I found something completely different. There were folders filled with maintenance payments made over many years. There were receipts for repairs, records showing who had paid utility bills, insurance documents, renovation costs, and handwritten notes attached to many of the pages. Every document was carefully dated. Every payment had a name beside it. Nothing had been left to memory or guesswork. As I continued reading, I realized my grandfather had recorded much more than money. He had written why certain responsibilities had been given to specific family members. Some people were responsible for repairs. Others handled insurance or taxes. Every responsibility had a reason written beside it. Then I found my own name. There were records showing many of the bills I had paid after my grandfather passed away. There were notes explaining that I had continued taking care of responsibilities without being asked. I had never imagined anyone had been quietly recording those years. Page after page, the story became clearer. Things that had seemed like small everyday tasks were actually part of a much bigger plan my grandfather had carefully organized. For the first time, I could see a complete timeline instead of separate events. Just as I reached the end of the file, I noticed one final envelope. It was sealed. Across the front, my grandfather had written clear instructions, saying it could only be opened when one other specific person was present. I looked at the advisor, hoping he would tell me who that person was. He nodded slowly and said, "That meeting has already been arranged." At that moment, I realized the biggest answer was still waiting, and whatever was inside that final document would explain why everyone had tried so hard to keep me away from the truth. A few days later, the retired advisor asked everyone to meet at his office. When I arrived, I was surprised to see so many relatives already there. Some of them had not spoken to each other in years. My mother sat quietly beside Naira. My aunt avoided looking at me. Everyone seemed nervous because nobody knew exactly why this meeting had been called. The sealed envelope was lying on the table, but no one touched it. A few minutes later, the office door opened. An elderly man walked inside carrying a small leather folder. The moment the retired advisor welcomed him, I understood that he was someone important. He introduced himself as the longtime executor and witness my grandfather had trusted for many years. My family looked completely surprised. I could tell they had never expected him to appear. He greeted everyone politely before taking a seat. Instead of opening the sealed document immediately, he began explaining the events that had happened years earlier. He spoke slowly and carefully, using records, letters, receipts, and dated notes to support every part of the story. Nothing he said was based on memory or personal opinion. Every statement matched a document placed on the table. As he continued, one misunderstanding after another disappeared. He explained why my grandfather had carefully written down every payment made toward the family home. He explained why different family members had been given different responsibilities. He also explained that my grandfather believed future family problems would not come from money alone. They would come from people, forgetting who had accepted which responsibilities over the years. The room stayed quiet as everyone listened. For the first time, my mother stopped repeating that everything had been done only to help Naira. Even Naira looked confused because she realized she had never known the full story either. Both of them had made important decisions without first understanding what my grandfather had actually planned. I looked around the room and saw the expressions on everyone's faces changing. The more facts the witness presented, the harder it became for anyone to defend the decisions that had forced me out of the house. Finally, he closed the last file and placed both hands on the sealed envelope. He looked around the room before speaking. "I have now explained everything that happened before your grandfather's final instructions," he said quietly. "Only one document remains." Every eye turned toward the envelope. For the first time, everyone understood that the biggest answer had been waiting there all along, and nobody knew what would happen once it was finally opened. The executor carefully opened the sealed envelope and removed the final document. The entire room was silent as he began reading my grandfather's written instructions. I expected to hear something about money or ownership of the house, but that was not what the document was about. My grandfather had never asked anyone to choose between me and Naira. The document made that very clear. This had never been a competition between two granddaughters. Instead, he explained that the family home came with several long-term legal responsibilities that had to be managed carefully. Those responsibilities included dealing with official paperwork, insurance matters, maintenance records, and other legal obligations connected to the property. Years earlier, after watching each family member over a long period of time, my grandfather had chosen one person to continue handling those responsibilities. He had not made that decision because he loved one grandchild more than another. He had chosen the person who had already shown responsibility, honesty, and consistency through actions, not words. That person was me. The executor showed the written records explaining why my grandfather had reached that decision. Every document matched the timeline we had already seen. My years of paying bills, handling repairs, keeping records, and solving problems were not forgotten. My grandfather had noticed everything. Then the room finally understood what had happened. By asking me to leave without learning the truth first, my family had accidentally created a serious problem. They had treated my role as if anyone could simply replace it overnight. But the legal responsibilities could not be transferred just because someone wanted a different arrangement. The process required proper agreements and official steps. My mother slowly covered her face with her hands. Naira looked down at the table without saying a word. Neither of them had expected this. In that moment, I understood why everyone had suddenly become so worried. They were not afraid because I had left the house. They were afraid because they had finally realized that responsibility could not be handed to whoever happened to be living in my room. My grandfather had trusted me with something much bigger than a bedroom, and they had ignored that without ever asking why. Months passed after that meeting, and little by little everything was settled the right way. The property matters were reorganized through proper legal agreements, exactly as my grandfather had planned many years before. There were no angry court battles or dramatic family fights. Every document was reviewed carefully, every responsibility was placed where it belonged, and everyone finally understood why my grandfather had created such detailed records. For the first time in a long while, decisions were based on facts instead of emotions. Naira slowly rebuilt her life on her own. She found a stable job, rented a place for herself and her children, and stopped believing that her future depended on someone else giving up theirs. I was happy to see her standing on her own feet because I had never wanted her to suffer. I had only wanted to be treated fairly. One afternoon, my mother asked to meet me. She looked very different from the woman who had pointed toward the front door and told me to leave. With tears in her eyes, she admitted that fear and urgency had made her act without thinking. She said she had been so focused on helping Naira that she never stopped to consider how deeply she had hurt me. She apologized for making a decision without asking me, without listening to me, and without trying to understand the truth first. I accepted her apology because carrying anger forever would only hurt me. But forgiveness did not erase everything that had happened. When she asked if I wanted to move back home, I quietly said no. I had already started building a new life, and I needed a place where I felt respected, not simply needed. Over time, some family relationships slowly became stronger because people stopped making excuses and started accepting responsibility for their actions. Other relationships remained distant because trust takes much longer to rebuild than words can repair. Looking back now, I no longer think the day I walked out of that house was the worst day of my life. It became the day that changed everything. My family finally learned that there is a big difference between depending on someone and truly respecting them. And for the first time, I chose a place in the family where my kindness was valued instead of expected.